My twin spent months studying me, my voice, my smile, my secrets. On my wedding day, she poured the champagne, wore my dress, and walked down the aisle as me, until one family ritual exposed everything. My twin sister, Mara Vale, started watching me like a lab technician the night I told our family I was engaged. Not staring, studying. It was subtle at first, her eyes tracing my hands when I spoke, the little smile when I made people laugh, the tilt of her head like she was memorizing angles. She cried at the table when I lifted my hand to show the ring Julian had given me. Everyone assumed it was tenderness. I knew better. She'd just been dumped for the 5th time that year, and between sniffles she told me, he said I'm too much, while staring so intently at the diamond I worried it might crack under her gaze. After that dinner, I caught her performing tiny audits of my life. Mara bought blouses identical to mine, same cut, same color, same faint stripe, and claimed it was because we shared taste. She asked what serum I used, what I told my stylist, and whether I took collagen. When I laughed about it to Julian, he said it was cute that she wanted sister time. Even when he mentioned she'd texted him to ask about our favorite date nights, I thought, fine, nosy, but fine. Then came the Tom mess. She'd been excited, glowing, really, when Tom asked her out. On their first dinner together, a waitress forgot a straw, and Mara accused the woman of flirting right to her face. Tom never texted back. 1 week later, at my office party, Tom cornered me near the appetizer table to say hello, all smirk and elbows. I shut it down quickly. Mara saw us anyway. She went home early. The next morning, she appeared at my apartment with a haircut identical to mine. You made that cut look grown up, she said. I told myself not to be weird about it. It stopped being quirky after midnight 3 Tuesdays later. I woke to the sound of my own laugh, a recording, coming from Mara's room in our parents' house. I knocked. She opened the door like nothing was odd, a spreadsheet glowing behind her. Budgeting for the wedding, she lied. Weeks later, when I borrowed her laptop to finish a report, I found a folder named Violet, my name. Inside were color-coded spreadsheets, blue for pet names Julian and I used, green for inside jokes, red for intimate details I'd never told anyone but him. There were tabs cataloging my cadence, my phrases, my habits, how often I touched my left earlobe when I was nervous, how I angled my head when I disagreed. I closed the laptop and felt my throat lock tight. When I finally begged our parents to talk to her, Mara cried on demand. She told them I'd been cruel since childhood, that I stole the air from rooms. They patted her shoulder and told me to stop dramatizing my wedding. She's trying, Lena, my mother said, using my full name, Lena Vale, like punctuation. She's getting help. Getting help, apparently, meant showing up to my office pretending to be me. She breezed past the front desk where they recognized my face, told my coworkers I had a family emergency, and lingered to ask about deadlines and gossip as though she sat at my desk every day. I learned about it when Julian texted, "Can't believe I ran into you, loved our little moment." My stomach hollowed out. I hadn't left the building. Turns out Mara had gone to his office and leaned in when he kissed her cheek hello. When I told him it wasn't me, he tried to soften it. "Babe, you ate half my sandwich at lunch," he said with a worried smile. "Are you sure you're sleeping?" I showed my mother the texts. She pressed her lips together and said she'd get Mara evaluated. Nothing happened. 6 months later, on the morning of my wedding at the Orchid House Hotel in Harborford, Mara arrived early with champagne and strawberries, her energy pitched so high it made my teeth ache. "Hydration for your glow," she chirped, topping up my glass again and again. The room tilted. "Sit," she said gently when my knees buckled, as if she were the nurse and I the patient. Through the blur, I saw her unzip a garment bag she'd brought. My dress, no, a replica, floated up like fog. "What are you doing?" I tried to ask, but my tongue had turned to felt. "Becoming you," she said in my voice, calm as a weather report. "I've practiced everything." She listed things no one should have known. The curve of Julian's birthmark on his inner thigh, the way he liked his eggs soft, the private joke we'd made about the neighbor's dog. Then the lights in my head went out. I woke on tile, my cheek numb with cold. The dress hung on the door like a ghost. The door was locked from the outside. Voices bled through the wall. My mother's laugh. Julian's voice. Mara replying in my tone so perfectly my brain stuttered. I crawled to the sink and drank from the tap, trying to flush whatever she'd given me. The window was painted shut. I fished nail scissors from my makeup bag and worried at the seam, my hands shaking so badly the blades nicked my fingers. Footsteps. The lock clicked. She stepped in wearing my face, my makeup, my dress. She'd even drawn the tiny beauty mark one always place above my lip. "The photographer needs the getting ready shots," she said, placing a cool palm on my forehead. "I told them you locked yourself in." Then she pushed me into the tub, turned the water cold, and left me sputtering under a needle-thin stream. "Stay awake," she said. "I want you to see." When the suite emptied for photos, the hallway quieted. The paint finally cracked. The window creaked open to sky, 3 stories up. No ledge, no fire escape. Back to the door. Bobby pin in the lock. Click. I staggered into the suite. The cord on the landline was snipped. Of course it was. I took the stairs to the lobby because the elevator was galaxies away. At the fountain, I saw my bridesmaids fluffing a train, my mother dabbing tears, Julian with his hand around a waist that looked like mine. Mara laughed my laugh at something the photographer said and kissed Julian's cheek just so. I tried to run, my knees folded. A hotel attendant caught me. "Ma'am, are you okay?" he asked, radio halfway to his mouth. "That's not me," I managed, pointing with a shaking hand. He stared, trying to reconcile two identical faces, one in a slip, wet and wild-eyed, one in satin, caged in flowers. "We have an intoxicated guest," he said into his radio. Mara floated over, the concerned bride, the perfect sister. "She's been struggling," she told him smoothly. "We thought she was better. I'm Lena." "She's Mara," I croaked. Even I didn't believe the sound of me. Julian came within reach and stepped back when I reached for him. Something inside me cracked like a dropped glass. They guided me to a conference room off the corridor. Alone with me, Mara dropped the sweetness. "Pathetic," she said, and when I lunged, she slid aside with the ease of someone who had rehearsed me. The door opened. My mother peeked in, her gaze landing on the bride. "Sweetheart, the photographer's waiting," she told Mara, then turned to me as if I were a stray fire. "I'll sit with her." Mara smoothed the skirt, paused, and said, "Don't worry, I'll take good care of your life." Then she left me with our mother and a ticking clock. My mother treated me like a bomb with a smudged countdown. She coaxed me to a chair and hovered near the door, as if closeness might ignite something. My reflection in the bathroom mirror told me why she believed the wrong daughter. Mascara sluiced down my face, hair plastered to my skull, a borrowed slip clinging like seaweed. I looked like a cautionary tale. "Rest," she urged, the voice from childhood sick days. "Lie down before the ceremony." Ceremony. The word made the air thin. The attached bathroom had no window, no phone, nothing breakable. Back in the room, a carafe of water waited. I drank straight from the spout, not caring about manners. The more I flushed my body, the more likely I could think. The hallway outside the cracked door burbled with the sounds I'd daydreamed about for months. Cousins greeting cousins, shoes clicking on marble, someone laughing too loudly because weddings invite permission. Every second, the ceremony crept closer. I needed proof that I was me in a room determined to believe I was not. I tried logic. "Mom," I said, careful, "who taught me to braid?" She blinked. "Your grandmother," she said automatically. "Fishbone first." I nodded. "Who taught me to swim?" A pause. "Coach Amina, when you were 7. "And who taught me the stupid hand game we made up for long car rides?" Her eyes softened and then went hard again. "Lena, I'm not doing this." The decision to talk to me like I was fog settled in her shoulders. Her phone buzzed. The photographer needed the bride. She told me to nap and slipped out. The door didn't click locked. They no longer thought I was a problem. I counted to 15 and opened it. The hallway teemed. I ducked into a supply closet. Housekeeping uniforms hung like cheap disguises. I grabbed the smallest, dragged it on over the damp slip, and pulled my hair into a severe ponytail. Towels from a cart became my camouflage. When I stepped back into the corridor, my heart quit trying to rattle loose from my ribs and started beating like a metronome. Task, task, task. I found our ballroom not by number but by the white roses and baby's breath I had irrationally insisted upon because they reminded me of the first roadside bouquet Julian ever bought from a teenage vendor working a red light. Through the cracked door I saw men I loved straightening ties, laughing like they hadn't practiced jokes to hide nerves. I saw the altar I had built in my head when I was 10 and watched a made-for-TV wedding on summer break. I saw the candles that would become both problem and salvation. The coordinator lifted a hand. The processional music rose, sweet and familiar. My bridesmaids floated in the lavender I'd chosen precisely because it suited all their skin tones. The flower girl, my cousin's solemn daughter, scattered petals like she was laying a path in a forest. Julian's nephew toddled behind, taking his mission so seriously he nearly tripped over air. And then Mara in my dress, on my father's arm. That was wrong. I had chosen to walk alone. My father kissed her veil and placed her hand into Julian's as if he were giving me away, and my vision fuzzed. I caught another wrongness. The bouquet. Mara clutched it at her waist with both fists. I always cradled mine low in one hand, the other relaxed at my hip. Small things, stray screws in a machine. The officiant welcomed everyone to celebrate Lena and Julian, and I watched my life happen to someone else. When the moment for objections passed, I did not stand and declare an objection. I wasn't a movie. I was a woman in a borrowed uniform who would be dragged out if she shouted. So I looked for the seam. It came where vows belonged. We had spent weeks writing ours separately, promising to keep them secret until the moment. Julian went first, voice warm enough to thaw concrete, telling a story about the exact second he realized I was the person he wanted on his team for every broken appliance and every sunrise. Tears ran down my face without my permission. Then Mara spoke. She started with safe words: love, partnership, commitment, pretty in general, like frames without photos. She faltered, laughed, called it nerves, continued. Julian's brow knitted. He had been prepared for specificity. Our pizza failures, the fact that I mispronounced espresso until he taught me, the awful song my dad always played on road trips. He got greeting card soup. The coordinator shifted, then motioned discreetly to someone in the back. A server entered the service door beside me with a tray. I caught her sleeve. Emergency for the bride, I whispered. Concerned, she took it to the coordinator, who approached the altar and murmured to Mara. My sister flinched. Panic flashed beneath the veil. Mara performed one of her oldest tricks, the swoon. She pressed a hand to her forehead and wobbled. Julian steadied her. Water, the coordinator requested. I carried a glass like a soldier carrying a flag and approached the altar with my head down. When our fingers touched, Mara's eyes found mine. The recognition was sharp enough to draw blood. She smiled in my smile and sipped like a lady at tea. The officiant suggested they continue. Julian hesitated, searching her face for something he couldn't name. She dragged him into a kiss too deep for the moment. The guests cooed. He startled. We We had planned to wait for the pronouncement. She didn't know that. The rings came out. Julian slid the band onto her hand with steady fingers but a restless gaze. When she tried to place his ring, it pinged onto the floor. People giggled, then hushed. He bent to get it and saw me, really saw me. Our eyes locked, and confusion ran through his face like weather. I moved as if to help find the ring. He rose, looked from me to Mara, then back to me. The officiant prompted them forward. Then came the unity candle, his family's tradition they called La Vela de Lazos, a blending ceremony taught by his abuela Camilla, who insisted the couple say a particular Spanish phrase she'd learned from her mother's village. We had practiced the tongue twister with her over cookies until tears of laughter held us hostage. I had promised abuela I would say it exactly right. The tapers were lit. The big candle waited. Julian lifted his taper, watching Mara. She lifted hers, fearless and blank. He prompted her gently. Do you remember what abuela asked us to say? His grandmother leaned forward, eyes shining. Mara opened her mouth, found nothing, and closed it again. The silence felt like a storm door. A whisper tugged at the crowd. Abuela shook her head slowly. Not right. I stepped into the aisle, met Julian's eyes, and silently formed the first half of the phrase, the one that had made me stumble every time. Que la luz que compartimos nos haga valientes. His face emptied of doubt. He set down his taper. Mara tried to improvise something generic about light and love, but abuela made a small sound that was both laugh and sob. The old woman knew. The old woman had always known me. Julian's voice was steady when he turned from the candle to the woman in white. Tell me about our first date, he said. Not where. What happened when the fire alarm went off and they evacuated the restaurant? Mara's face went smooth as a mirror. She had memorized my timeline, but she didn't have the moment. The two of us in a parking lot, sharing breadsticks like thieves, laughing until our stomachs hurt while sprinklers misted the asphalt. She stuttered nothing. The officiant whispered to Julian. Julian shook his head and spoke to the crowd. We need to pause, he said, for unexpected reasons. The room erupted. My parents stood. The coordinator began funneling people toward the doors. Mara called out my name, my actual name, by instinct when she panicked, claiming I was ruining her wedding, and the mask slid off her like a discarded glove. Our mother's face changed in real time as she looked between us and finally saw how I held myself, how I touched my earlobe, how Julian held my hand the way he always did, thumb tucked under. It didn't matter that I was wearing a cleaning smock. Truth rearranged the furniture in everyone's heads at once. Security hovered, unsure if this was assault or opera. Mara tore the veil off and threw it at me. You stole everything, she screamed. You took the life meant for me. My grandmother-in-law crossed herself. The coordinator called for calm in a voice that sounded like an apology to the very concept of calm. Julian moved to my side and didn't leave it again. They took Mara gently but firmly from the ballroom. She fought like a cornered thing, insisting she was the bride, even as she used my name for herself and her own name for me. Our mother followed with a hand pressed to her chest. Our father looked like a house after a hurricane, still standing, windows shattered. Guests drifted out in knots, buzzing like neon. Someone snapped photos they shouldn't have. The unity candle sat unlit, the tapers guttering in their silver holders as if embarrassed to be involved. The hotel moved quickly. A manager appeared with an apology bouquet and a meaningful glance at security footage he wasn't describing. Do you want to continue? The coordinator asked Julian and me softly, eyes flicking to the arch of wilting roses. The room looked like a stage after the audience has left, scuffed, haunted by the thing it almost held. I could have said, yes, let's salvage. What I said was, not today. Julian nodded like he'd already decided and only needed me to speak it aloud. We slipped out through the service hall to the gardens where we had once considered saying our vows under a crooked cedar. Dusk poured honey over the leaves. My body finally began sending its backlog of messages, trembling, aching, the slow percussion of a drug wearing off. I cried into Julian's jacket while he held me as if he could keep my molecules from unraveling. When grief thinned into breath, we sat on a stone bench and watched the hotel windows glow one by one. He asked me to tell him the parking lot breadstick story again from the beginning. I did. Every little wrong turn we took to find each other's mouths between laughter. Only you would remember we fed the last breadstick to a stray cat, he said, smiling into my hair. Staff found my phone in the bridal suite where Mara had hidden it. The missed calls were a landslide. We turned it off. We ordered room service to the honeymoon suite we'd never intended to use until later. Fried chicken and a sad salad, plus a slice of cake the kitchen sent with an apology note. I ate in the hotel robe because the housekeeping uniform felt like a costume with a punchline I didn't want anymore. Julian put our first dance song on a portable speaker, and we swayed in circles on the carpet, soft and slow, our bodies speaking a language Mara had tried to rote learn and couldn't. That night, I thought of my twin drifting toward white walls and paperwork. I imagined her in a hospital gown, mascara carved into her cheeks from the breakdown she could no longer direct. I felt anger like heat and pity like water poured onto it. She had wanted a shortcut to being loved and chosen. She had mistaken replication for intimacy. She didn't understand that love isn't a costume, it's a daily invention. The song ended. We kept moving. Morning slid under the curtains like a bright question. Julian's suit was rumpled, and his voice had the gravel of too little sleep when he started the parade of vendor calls to unravel the logistics of a day that had never completed. The hotel manager came with printed statements and a request that we involve police. No, I said. She's my sister. He nodded without agreeing and mentioned that Mara would be banned from the property. My phone had swollen with texts and and voicemails from people who loved mess, people who loved me, and people who loved both. I stared at them until the screen went black. At noon, my mother knocked. She had aged a decade overnight, the lines deepening around her mouth, her shoulders sloped. Mara had checked into a psychiatric facility voluntarily, she said, after a doctor used words like delusional fixation and personality features. My mother apologized until the apologies felt like beads slipping through my fingers. She touched the torn seam of my wedding dress through its garment bag as though it were a wound. We packed what could be packed. The flowers that had cost too much went to a shelter, courtesy of Julian's mother. Abuela pressed a tiny gold charm into my hand, murmuring something about mirrors and light. The photographer emailed a handful of pre-ceremony images. Mara wore my expression almost perfectly. The photos were evidence, but not of what she wanted. If I stared long enough, I could name the microscopic tells, the angle of her chin, the way her shoulders crept up. Julian deleted the folder without asking. We don't need them, he said, and my lungs found space. We spent the afternoon in the business center, sending a mass message that the wedding had been postponed due to a family emergency. Thank you for understanding. The lawyer confirmed there had been no legal marriage. We were free to choose a new path. My father appeared late with hospital updates. Sedated, stable, he said, exhausted. They want to watch her. Start medication. He asked if I wanted to visit. My mouth said no before my brain knew what it wanted. I watched my father absorb that and nod. That evening, our friends turned a living room into a stitchery circle for our frayed edges. They pressed pizza on us, corny jokes, and deliberately normal conversation until I laughed at a failed charades guess and surprised myself with the sound. Back at the hotel, I stared at the ceiling and counted the breaths between waves of adrenaline. Julian slid a hand under mine, and I slept inside the shape of it. The next day we returned home. Nothing was missing. Everything was wrong. My mug sat on the shelf I never used. Julian's shoes had been lined up toe to heel like little soldiers, not how he leaves them. The details were small and catastrophic. We changed the locks, and then we changed the positions of objects back to their original places as if we were exorcists. My boss granted me more time off. She'd heard orbiting versions of the chaos and didn't push for details. Julian's office sent fruit and no questions. The silence tasted like kindness. My parents came with takeout and updates. Mara was participating. She painted in art therapy. She spoke about identity in metaphors, oceans, mirrors, fog. The doctors were optimistic. They asked if I intended to file charges. I shook my head. I didn't want my sister in a courtroom, measured in crimes rather than needs. My mother cried from relief and grief at once. My father cleaned the kitchen island as though he could scrub the last 24 hours out of it. We went to bed early and woke up older. Weeks gathered, both heavy and strangely quick. We saw a therapist who specialized in siblings, wounds, and the strange math of identical twins who carry each other's faces but not each other's limits. She helped us name what had happened without letting it become all that would happen. She warned me that early apologies from Mara would probably be about Mara's pain, not mine. That I could accept that truth without accepting blame. 3 weeks after the day that wasn't, Julian proposed again across a breakfast table crowded with coffee, toast, and a vase of daisies that looked like they'd invented cheerfulness. Anytime, he said, anywhere. However, I said yes while crying into marmalade. We told only our parents. My mother offered to plan something soft and small. I told her I needed simplicity. She nodded without offense. My father squeezed my shoulder like a lighthouse flashes. A month later a letter arrived from the facility. Mara's handwriting tilted and scraped, unsettled by medication. She apologized in loops that bent toward herself. She felt invisible. She felt cheated by genes that gave us the same face but not the same luck. I read it once and filed it in a box with tax documents and other paperwork you can't set on fire even when you want to. Maybe someday I'd answer. Maybe I wouldn't. We married at City Hall 6 weeks later. The officiant misread my middle name and we heckled him gently. He laughed, grateful. I wore a sundress from my closet and carried a clutch of supermarket flowers that shed their pollen on my wrist. We ate too much food in Julian's parents' backyard while Abuela tried to feed every person twice. Someone strung lights between two skinny trees and the bulbs looked heroic. My mother took a single photo on her phone. Julian with frosting on his nose, me laughing at a dad joke. No professional framing. It was my favorite picture of us because Joy didn't pose for it. We framed the marriage certificate and hung it in our bedroom like proof that truth can be quiet and still outrun spectacle. Normal days stacked up. Work, rice for dinner, laundry folded with half attention, therapy on Tuesdays. I learned the shape of calm again. I slept nights without dreaming of bathrooms. I let the word sister sit in my mouth without telling me who I had to call. Time sanded the edges of the story without blunting it. I could say the incident and everyone close to me knew which thing I meant without making me say it again. The almost wedding date came around like a ghost, and I let it pass on the couch with pancakes and a terrible action movie. When my parents told me Mara might be discharged soon to outpatient care, the news landed like a coin on a table, bright, cold, unavoidable. I told Julian the first wanted to move. Not forever away, I said, just new windows. He understood, because understanding me was his favorite hobby. We found a smaller place 2 hours from Harborford, farther from the hotel, the florist, and far enough to loosen something in my chest. The apartment had wild light and friendly noises from the street. We painted the living room ourselves, streaks of color running up our forearms. I chose a blue-green Mara had never seen and watched it dry into a new fact. While packing, I found the nail scissors I'd used to saw through paint on the bathroom window, and the housekeeping uniform that had concealed me while I reclaimed my name. I put them both in a shoebox without ceremony. In the new place, I could walk to a corner bakery that sold donuts shaped like moons. Our neighbors didn't know I had been a headline in other people's group chats. They treated us like a couple who argued in the cereal aisle about which granola was less birdseed. Why? It was a relief that should be bottled. I started running for the first time in my life, following a loop that let me count boxwood hedges and listen to my feet make sense of the past. Sometimes Julian ran with me, and the sound of us breathing in sync felt like an oath. Another letter arrived, forwarded from our old address. This one was shorter and pointed outward. Mara wrote that she had begun to understand what she'd done as a violation of personhood, not just a terrible idea. Her therapist had given it a name, but she preferred the word stealing. She said she was sorry but didn't ask me for anything. I put the letter next to the other one and noticed that my hands didn't shake this time. My mother called one evening and cried softly into the phone. Happy tears, she said quickly. Mara had a breakthrough. She spoke about a session where Mara used words like harm without pairing them with but. She told me there might be a day Mara could apologize to me the way I deserved. Only if you want it, she added, and only when you say. I thanked her. After the call, I sat on our small balcony and watched the sunset tint the building windows rose. Julian arrived with tea and a blanket, no questions. He was bilingual in my silences. Mara's voluntary admission had always felt half like bravery and half like evasion, but progress as a sideways animal. I let myself hold two truths at once. She had been dangerous to me, and she was trying not to be. Abuela visited, blessed the doorframes, and left a bowl of lemons under the kitchen window to catch bad eyes. Friends came to the new town, and we bought cheap candles that smelled like desserts and argued about whether a croissant was a pastry or a bread. It felt like life, not the shiny version, the edible one. We stayed in couples therapy longer than we'd planned, not out of crisis but because the space gave us practice in noticing. We told the story again from new angles, uncovering the places where old habits had made Mara's rehearsal room bigger, times I'd swallowed discomfort for peacekeeping, moments Julian had dismissed his instincts because it would be silly to suspect. We rewrote those little scripts on purpose. We used more words. We turned on more lights. When I finally saw Mara again, the meeting took place in a neutral space, a therapist's office with upholstered chairs and a fern trying hard to look healthy. My parents sat one chair over, ready to be a bridge or a border. Mara looked like herself and not like me in a way I had never registered before the incident. She had an artist's smear of paint at the cuff of her sleeve, and she took a long time to meet my eyes. Lena, she said, her voice stripped of performance. I'm sorry. I planned, and I took. If forgiveness is a room, I accept that I may never be allowed inside it. I will live with that. I am committed to being safe. It was the closest thing to a true apology I had ever heard from her. It didn't fix history, but it didn't wound me anew. Boundaries went up like guardrails on a road that needed them. No surprise visits. No access to our building. If she felt a spiral starting, she would call her therapist before she called a family member. My parents agreed without flinching. Mara nodded, eyes wet but not pleading. The session ended without a hug, which felt like a kindness to both of us. The world did that irreverent thing it always does. It kept going. We learned our neighborhood baker's name, Kiki, discovered a park where weekend chess games turned rowdy, found a bodega with the good plantains. We adopted a scrappy cat who chose us by walking straight into our apartment when I opened the door with groceries, then refused to leave. I named her Mint, green eyes, fresh trouble. She slept on Julian's shoulder like a scarf. Julian's grandmother visited the new apartment and brought the Unity candle set we had never used. We don't have to, I told her, throat tightening. We'll do it our new way, she said. She placed the big candle between us on the coffee table and handed us unlit tapers. Say it, she urged, her eyes bright. We did, the Spanish phrase that had saved me, slow and correct. She applauded as though we were off Broadway. It felt like stitching a torn page back into a book. You would think, after all that, the story would be done telling itself. But trauma is a garden that keeps sprouting volunteer plants. Sometimes on a Tuesday, a smell or a chord progression tugged me back into the ballroom. Sometimes I dreamed of blue spreadsheets and woke grinding my teeth. And sometimes I laughed so hard at nothing important that I couldn't believe I had ever forgotten how. Healing wasn't a line, it was a looping trail with benches. News about Mara came through my parents at a pace that felt humane. She kept painting. She started volunteering at a community center where teenagers made murals under an overpass. She sent no more letters. My mother learned to talk about Mara's progress without glancing at me for permission. My father sent photos of Mint whenever he visited, pretending the cat preferred him. She did not. At work, the new project lead had the emotional intelligence of a houseplant, and that mundane annoyance was a gift. It meant my bandwidth was spent on present-day nonsense rather than mining the past for explanations. Julian flourished at his job in a way that made me want to brag to strangers. On Saturdays, we made pancakes and tried not to ruin them. On Sundays, we walked to the flea market, touched objects with history, and decided not to bring them home. Occasionally, a story about us would flare up in the old town. A cousin told a hairstylist, and I'd get a text asking if it was true I'd fought my sister at the altar. I answered less and less. The people who needed the truth already had it. Everyone else was just passing time. The Orchid House Hotel sent us a credit we hadn't asked for to make amends. We used it on our first anniversary, spending a night in a room that did not hold the past. We ordered room room service again on purpose and danced in our socks to a different song. I lit a candle I'd brought from home and felt my heart do nothing dramatic, which was exactly the miracle I wanted. Mara's name stayed out of our daily vocabulary, not from fear but from respect for the walls we had built. When my mother asked if we might someday send Mara a photo from our City Hall wedding, I said maybe, and meant it. The image had become less a trophy and more a talisman for us, and talismans prefer quiet. The City Hall clerk who married us recognized us months later while we were out walking. He joked about becoming famous for mispronouncing my middle name. We told him he had improved the ceremony by making it imperfect. He asked if we were still good. We were. He didn't know what a relief it was that strangers could be part of our story without breaking it. A year after our move, the community center where Mara volunteered hosted an open wall night. Anyone could paint for an hour. My parents invited us. I said yes, partly because I was tired of being afraid of rooms that might contain Mara, and partly because I wanted to see her not as a shadow puppeteer but as a person painting a shape. The overpass was cold and loud, the air thrumming with the hiss of spray cans and the laughter of teenagers. Mara stood a little apart, nodding to a boy who was debating whether a dragon needed 4 claws or 5. When she noticed me, she lifted a hand in a wave and didn't approach. It was the right choreography. I painted a small lemon in the corner of a communal panel because Abuela's bowl had become a symbol of not letting other people's eyes define mine. Julian outlined the lemon like a halo. Mara added a sprig. None of us wrote our names beside the contributions. On the drive home, I felt like I had finally taken off shoes that were always half a size too small. When Mara eventually asked, through my mother, if she could speak to Julian, I paused a long time before answering. He let me decide. I said yes, in a supervised setting, because I needed her to say out loud that she understood he was not a prop. They met with the therapist. Julian came home, set his keys down, and said, she apologized to me. No qualifiers. He looked relieved in a way I hadn't seen before. We cooked dinner without naming what had unclenched. We visited the old town less. When we did, the hotel loomed like a glossy ghost we chose not to visit. Abuela stayed healthy enough to keep offering us second helpings we didn't need. My parents practiced their own boundaries, which looked like going to bed early and not answering phones after 9. Mint developed a crush on a sun puddle and organized her days around it. On a random Thursday 2 years after the incident, I woke up and realized I hadn't thought about the bathroom lock for weeks. The realization didn't make me panicky. It made me grateful enough that I cried through my shower, then laughed, because the brain is a circus. I told Julian, and he kissed my wet hair and said, I am so proud of your neurons. The story keeps its shape, but it also keeps moving. If I tell it now, I lead with what saved me rather than what almost swallowed me. The phrase Abuela taught me, the way Julian's eyes refused to lie, the tiny wrongness of a bouquet held too high. I leave out the part where I tasted metal on my tongue and thought I would never feel safe again, not because it didn't happen, but because the ending edited it, softened it with the weight of all the days that followed. Sometimes people ask if I forgave Mara. I tell them forgiveness isn't a gate she walks through, it's a fence I chose to build just high enough so we can wave from our sides without climbing. We share parents, a history, and a punchline about how we couldn't keep goldfish alive as kids. We do not share intimacy. That belongs to me and the man who held my face in his hands in a ballroom and said, without saying it, I know you in ways a mirror can't. If there is a moral, I don't want it to be about vigilance or about how women should become security systems. I want it to be about how specificity saves us. The world invites imitation, outfits and filters and curated this and that, but the way someone you love pronounces your name after a long day, the exact cadence of your shared dumb joke, the tongue twister your grandmother gifted you, those cannot be replicated by study. They are alive. They reveal. They protect. Our City Hall certificate hangs on our bedroom wall where only we see it when we reach for socks. The frame is crooked by a degree, and I refuse to fix it because it makes me smile. On Sunday mornings, Julian makes coffee exactly right, and I never take it for granted. Mint sits at the window and judges pigeons. My mother calls to ask what color we painted our entryway because she wants to copy it, and we both laugh at the old irony until it feels like a new joke. Mara paints. She teaches teenagers how to layer colors, how to outline choices before filling them. She keeps her appointments. She writes sometimes and doesn't send the letters. My parents sleep better. Abuela sends me voice notes where she tests new cookie recipes and makes me repeat the Unity candle phrase like a spell, and I always do, gladly. Every anniversary, we use the hotel's credit to stay one night back in Harborford, a decision that baffled me at first. Why go back? But it turns out some ghosts are shy. If you look right at them, they blush and shuffle away. We order fries and watch sitcom reruns. We slow dance in our socks and blow out a candle I bring from home, saying the words right, then wrong on purpose, so we can laugh. The ballroom is always booked for someone else. I wish them light, specificity, and a cousin who takes great candids. On a Tuesday not long ago, I passed a pair of identical twins arguing at the corner store about potato chips. One wanted salt and vinegar, the other insisted it tasted like a dare. They moved in unison even when they disagreed. I smiled, not with nostalgia, but with the soft acceptance that our sameness had always been surface deep. Mara and I had been born under the same roof of skin and then, like everyone, grown into separate weather. Fate didn't hand us roles. We wrote them and then improvised frantically when we forgot the lines. If I could go back to the bathroom tile and talk to the version of me who was dragging cold air into drugged lungs, I'd tell her 3 things. First, this is not how your story ends. Second, you're You're not crazy, your fear is sane and temporary. Third, the phrase you practiced with a grandmother on a couch will be the rope you throw yourself. Take it, climb. Tonight, Julian is late because he got caught in the rain at the bus stop. He arrives drenched, cheeks bright, carrying a bag with a pastry from the bakery I love. He says, for the champion of specificity, and bows like a fool. I light a candle because I can, not because I must. We eat on the floor. We talk about nothing and also everything. We are exactly who we say we are. And that simple, ordinary truth, boring to anyone not living it, is the kind of miracle I will spend the rest of my life guarding gently and celebrating loudly.